Hello there, friends. Andrea with the 1960s bangs here. I'm trying out different decades, and today's 1960s, so Andrea with the 1960s bangs it is. Anywho, on today's discussion, I have the chance to catch up with my former YouTube mentor. I'd like to say YouTube colleague now. Maybe I've graduated to status of colleague. No, I'll just say friend with one of my friends, my YouTube friends, Benjamin A. Boyce. A couple months back, Benjamin made a video entitled What I Believe. And it was very fascinating to me because it really departed from what he typically speaks about on his channel. It delves into his, deep interest in narrative. And by the end of the 20 minutes, he does mention the name of God and whatnot. So I have wanted to speak with him about it for a while. And I was also curious to see if there would be anything else coming out going into that a little bit more. And there wasn't. So I wanted to go into it more. And he was kind enough to oblige. I think you guys are going to like this. It was a very meaningful discussion. And I really appreciate Benjamin being willing to open up to me about these topics. And as always, I am really interested to hear what you guys think. Please leave me a comment, or if you have a question for me or for Benjamin, please feel free to leave that as well. And if you are new, welcome, hello. Do not forget to subscribe on your way out. Ben Kenobi, also known as Benjamin A. Boyce to everyone else. How are you doing? How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
You're well? I'm well. I'm like going through a phase.
A phase or a face?
Well, I suppose it could be argued both because it has to do with this.
Oh,
But
is this how you
anyways,
manifest your intentionality?
it's how I manifest my femininity, I suppose.
Okay.
That was
So you have one of those.
Yeah, so
You have a femininity.
I do very much. Okay, so here's the thing that I've decided. Last year I ended up talking to you in March. And I don't remember when we spoke the year before, but I've just decided we do a March update every year. I've just decided that. That's happening. So yeah, it's this is the March update.
Here we are, March Madness.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Good call. So yeah. So that's what this is our update because I haven't chatted with you in a bit. The last time I spoke with you was around Christmas time. That was nice, and I just decided I would want to record it today just because I'm like, you know what? I bet that we'll talk about some good things that'll be good to catch. So a while back, you put out a video, and it's funny because I was looking it up to kind of refresh myself on what it was about exactly and what you spoke about exactly. And I wrote in the YouTube, in the search, I was like, Benjamin Boyce, God, and then like, oh no, there's nothing. No, nothing came up. Well, I mean, unrelated videos. But then like, oh no, he didn't use that word. What I believe. And then that's what came up. So that's the one. Oh yeah, no, I very much remember that video. And I was excited to see more. And I haven't seen any more on that topic from you.
Every once in a while, I broach it in a live stream. But I'm very sensitive to the ways in which people react to conversations of God in the audience that I have. And I don't have an audience like Paul Vanderklay, who has cultivated specifically a Christian audience, and also Jonathan Pajot has cultivated a Christian audience. I have not cultivated a religious audience. So I have a mixture of believers and non-believers. And when you bring up God, everybody has a lot of opinions, and it's very
They
rare to
do?
have people
Really?
express their experiences uh, rather than their opinions. And God, to me, is a principally an existential reality and not a mental or abstract reality. Though there are abstract properties of the conception of God that help me navigate my worldview, but in essence, it's not a concept.
So I actually remember you even said, like, you almost cringed at using the word God in the video that you made about it.
Yeah, it took me like 20
Yeah.
minutes to get around to
Yeah.
saying that. Yeah.
So is it, I'm going to get around to the narrative part of it. But with regards to, like, you just explained about why your audience sort of is, you're beholden to your audience in the way that you know that there will be a certain reaction. But if it wasn't for that, would you have taken 20 minutes if you were just doing a recording that you weren't going to put out, but you just wanted to get out in your own, like, just for your own sort of cathartic, like getting the concept out for into the world of just being spoken out, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, my speech doesn't exist independent of an audience at this point with regards to YouTube. Now, if I were to write that out, I would probably start with the concept first and then order everything around that, and then, start with the proposition and then fill in like the meaning and the experience stuff. But because the domain in which I operate and am made real to other people is through speech, spoken speech, public speech, I need to be aware of moving everybody toward my point. So starting general and then working to that concept. And especially with the concept of God, it's really important to create a context, the proper context in which to speak about that thing. And that takes a certain sort of maneuvering to establish an atmosphere or a space or a context for that conversation, that vulnerability, a very naked part of me, bringing it out into the open. You don't just lead. I don't lead with that. You could lead with that. Somebody could lead with that. Start like, look how vulnerable I am, and then go from there. But that's not necessarily my style. I think other people could probably pull that off. Start with the vulnerability, and like if somebody says, some YouTuber, let's say some public influencer or intellectual, if we can make like there's this line, and one over here is just the vapid Instagram influencer, and over here is like the deep dark web intellectual. Somewhere we all exist somewhere between those two things, between pretty and insubstantial to substantial but not necessarily good to look at, or about that. But if somebody over in the more catch the attention side of things, like is more concerned with catching attention rather than manipulating attention down the line, they would lead with, I am really depressed right now, or I've been in a depression right now. And that would be their hook. That would be the first thing. I guess in a spiritual context, like, I have had a vision. Like, wait, what are you talking about? Like, that sounds really freaking kooky, right? Like, I have had a revelation. I have been infused with the Spirit. I had a experience that lifted me out of my body, and I saw something that was really real. And if you start with that, that's going to completely knock everybody out of the park, and maybe somebody will listen to you, or maybe they'll give you a chance for you to like kind of come down to earth from there. Which I guess I was making an analogy between that and like starting with depression or an emotional state. I'm very angry right now. That's a very worldly emotion. So that's something that people can, get synced up with. But still, even if I was depressed or wanted to talk about my own experiences of depression, I would not start with depression. I would lead us through, and halfway through, I'd start talking about that thing because I'd established the space for that, and then I'd explore on the deeper end. I think that's just kind of my style.
Okay. So yeah, that makes sense that there are different styles and people go in different ways to cultivate a certain idea. So you want to be very careful. Like, you specifically are wanting to be. Wow,
Yeah.
we totally dove in. I just realized this in the last couple of conversations we've had. We had a little bit of like chat, a little bit of banter, but like today was like, oh, we're going right in. We're going right in. Okay, so you brought up the idea of attention, and you want to be careful in how you bring up this subject because it is so close to you, and you said in your video it is a long-term goal of yours to discuss such things. So I'm going back to the idea you want the right attention towards
Yeah.
this thing. So actually, the discussion that Jonathan Peugeot had with Jordan Peterson recently, Peugeot, did you see that?
I watched all the Brett ones, or both Brett ones, but I did
Okay.
not get around to the Peugeot
Okay,
one.
well, it'll still make sense. So he is speaking with Peterson, and Peterson is so like basically like, help me, Jonathan, help my unbelief. I believe, help me, my unbelief is kind of where Peterson is at. And Peugeot, in explaining something, he says worship, and Peterson is kind of like, ugh, kind of like whatever. And then Peugeot's very okay, we'll say attention rather than worship. We'll say attention, and then he uses the word attention from then on for the rest of the discussion. And that was fascinating to me. I've talked with you about attention before. That's something that
within the
asked
context
you.
of narrative and story.
Yes. And so I'm wondering about your thoughts about the concept of attention being a sort of worship being distilled out of that.
Okay, well, worship, you're bringing up worship, and that is specifically within the context of a religious communion of the people with the transcendent, right? Okay, so we'll just use Christian terms. We can translate into and out of them. But since you're a Christian, maybe your audience is a Christian, we'll just use those terms.
Okay.
We could easily go through, play all the word games and take up a bunch more time playing translation, but we can translate. But within the Christian domain of worship, and I grew up Christian. My dad's a pastor, but I'm not a theologian. So this is just my experience, my 18 years being a Christian, living in that realm, and then going forth from that realm. So I'm sure that there's other concepts of what worship is. But from my point of view, worship is I was just thinking about this the other day, about lifting up your hand. And in Christian worship and in certain evangelical contexts, people will lift up their hands and they'll pray. And then there's other levels to that where they're speaking in tongues or they're swaying. But if you take that image, and it's a very vulnerable position. It's actually really embarrassing to see and to look at and to do in public unless that's accepted within that community, that you can be that open. And if you just look at how I am at this point, I'm completely vulnerable to any attack, any sort of horizontal interaction. It's gone. I'm lifting myself out of that, and I am becoming like a flashing cursor on a Word document, right? I'm becoming open to something that can give me input.
Okay.
And if you enter into that state and you practice it, and if you really pay attention to what's happening, for me, my palms, like there's circles on my palms that open up, and I start becoming like an antenna. I can really feel. I don't like this word, energy, but I can feel this energy happening. It's a very light, subtle vibration. I can feel that, and I can feel it on my face. I can feel like there's a light above me and it's coming down on me, and that opening happens, and then I start feeling things come up from around here in me, like in my emotions start to like break free, and there's like some cruddy emotions for me, like all the things that I did that week or however long it's been since I worshiped, like those things start to break free, and I kind of have to like I allow them to go, but I pay attention to that. I pay attention to that feeling, and I feel them kind of drifting off of me, kind of like floating off, like kind of debris and dirt. And there are different levels to this in
Mm-hmm.
my experience of worship. But at a certain point, I become clean enough where my brain starts working again. And this is the problem with worship, because the brain gets in the way of
Wait,
paying
wait.
attention.
What? What? Can you explain that?
Phrase that as a question.
Can you go into the idea of your brain getting in the way of your attention? Thank you,
Yeah.
Sensei.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. I just wanted to specify so we're following the rails together. The mind is where I spend most of my attention. I spend most of my attention on my day-to-day life through my thoughts. And that is either why or because I am a writer, or because I write so much, I spent more and more attention to my thoughts. My thoughts are not independent, thank you, of my they're not independent of my emotions. A lot of my thoughts are dealing with my emotions, or like the energies, the hydraulics of my life. Like if I'm sad or happy, or if somebody says something mean to me, you know, my thoughts will go to that. Or like I interact with something on Twitter, like so my mind is always playing around with language, basically, and constructing things,
Mm-hmm.
and it's always using the base material of my reactions, and then trying to articulate my reactions into something that I can say that can have some sort of effect in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that activity of my mind and my heart interacting constantly is always directed at the world. It's always directed horizontally. Something that happened, some tragedy that happened in the United States, or just some stupid thing that somebody said, some other person said. It's in the human sphere. In order for me to have a relationship with that transcendent and enter into that worshipful state, I have to let go of my connection to that horizontal plane. I have to let it go. And this is
Okay,
what ties
okay,
me there.
okay, yes,
So
yes.
my mind is like, and I've disciplined myself, and I practiced this for a long time. My major spiritual change in my life occurred in 1998. And since 1998, I've had a lot of time to practice letting go of my mind, and seeing it as something that runs, not shutting it down. I'm not shutting down my mind, but I'm paying attention to other things. And my mind's always there. So there's this moment in my worship. I get so far and my mind comes back to me. My mind starts feeding on this energy because it's clear again, it's clean again. I got rid of that crust and that dirt that was weighing me down: sadness, depression, anger, guilt, all that shame, all that stuff is it, through worship for me, through attending to that transcendence and really paying attention to the physical manifestation of that energy. It's very, very, very subtle from me. It's a very subtle vibration, but paying attention to that introduces this process of being freed from that. And then my brain starts saying, I can play again. I can play again. And my brain's like, okay, what we can play with? And it starts thinking. And it's really attractive to me because it's really fun. Like my brain gets really fun, and then my attention starts getting into my brain. And then for the rest of my half-hour worship session, I bounce back and forth between recentering myself on that process of worship and then playing around with my mind. Now, one more thing, and then we can pivot out of this or go deeper into this, is that when I talk about that process of purification, there are there are different levels of that purification. And by purification, I mean letting go of the gick and the gunk that just kind of gets stuck to you during life, living your
Mm-hmm.
life. And you can't let go of living life. You can't let go of getting dirty. You can live in a way that causes you to be less dirty, but you're always going to get dirty.
Mm.
No matter how spiritual you are, you will always get dirty. And anybody who professes to free you completely from dirt and free you from life, they don't know what they're talking about,
Well, they're a
or
cult leader.
they're a cult leader. You need to actually be in a constant back and forth between the material world, or this world, and the transcendent. If you want to be a spiritual person, you're not here in this world to leave this world. You're here in this world to deal with this world. This world is dirty. Now, with regards to that dirt, there's that, if you have a spiritual practice, maybe once a week, twice a week, where you're in a worship setting, and this can be any given church, any given litany or series of worship or ceremony, etc., as long as you are using that all those different aspects of that church that you're in to allow yourself to interact with the Spirit, there will be a process of purification. That process of purification, it starts on the surface level, but over time it goes deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And you start to go through different experiences that take years or months or weeks of going through different layers of purification, where your actual attention, your mind, your feelings, all those things start to become more and more clean and more sensitive if you're on a spiritual path.
It sounds like you're talking about ritual. Like
How
you're
so?
talking about worship, but then, and maybe this is because I'm a little bit orthodox bent lately, but you're describing doing something that seems surface at first. So that could
Mm.
be, I'm thinking like, because we talked about iconoclasm the last time we spoke. So I was just thinking a little bit like, say, looking at an icon, or we'll just leave it there. But then you just start off by, and then saying maybe the Jesus prayer or something. And again, this you could use mantras in other religious spaces, or not even religious, because you could do meditative type spaces. It starts off on the surface. You're practicing it, prayer postures, or attention postures.
Mm-hmm.
And but then there are layers that you can penetrate deeper into, and I feel like I'm kind of repeating a little bit of what you said, but I'm just adding that that sounds like ritual.
Yeah. Well, to a certain degree, we require stairs to ascend. And those stairs start as very material stairs. You put your body in this position, you say these words. My spiritual practice doesn't have those steps. And for that reason, it doesn't translate well into religious discussions, because
Mm-hmm.
it is free of those steps. It is completely spontaneous and direct.
Okay.
And everybody has to find their own way. And everybody discovers their own steps, their own ritual along the way. But you're always returning to that state of being that flashing cursor, of being willing to let go of everything you have, absolutely letting go of everything you have to the best of your ability in order to receive something more.
Okay, like the open hand.
Yeah, like open hands.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna go over to the idea of, because the reason why you want to go into eventually this subject, you say because of you are a storyteller, because you're a storyteller in the world.
Mm-hmm.
If you focus on narrative, and you say it's linked, and can you go into that a little bit more about why? I don't think you said God, because this was within the first few minutes. You said belief, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Why is belief and storytelling intrinsically linked?
So I think that basically a story is the way in which we deal with time, and we deal with circumstance, we deal with self and other, and we deal with change, and we deal with context. The way in which a story is fashioned is that it's modeled entirely on human experience. It's just a replication of human experience. And if you look at like the rudiments of story, I think I've already said this, probably not to you, but I have already said this. When you are talking to a 2-year-old, let's say, somebody who has the rudiments of language and grammar and can understand what you're saying, right? and you start telling them a story, there's this amazing moment that if you do it right, their body becomes lax and they become completely receptive, and they're hanging on your every word, right? And they're just totally like absorbing this thing that you're putting into their brain. And I remember when I was really young, I remember there's these moments when people would tell me stories and I would see it. It would become a part of my memory. Like I lived through that whole thing. I would completely absorb those words and what they were saying. Like some older kids told me this scary story. I still think that it happened to me. Like it's in my brain that like they were in this haunted house and like things were getting really, really scary, you know, with like I remember like there was they had a mug with the American flag on it, and then it turned into a skull, you know, and it was just like this scary story, you know, and like I
How
would think back on
symbolic.
that.
Sorry, it's so symbolic. Like, it's like, it was America and then it turned into a skull. Like, Halloween type.
Yeah.
Anyway, go on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, totally. Um, so when you're talking to a 2-year-old, you don't have to have plot. You need to have some sort of frame of reference, which would be a character. So I would tell, you know, when I was working with 2-year-olds,
Yeah.
toddler land, you just tell the story of and then, and then, and then, and then,
Right.
and you just like mix in a bunch of random integers into there, like a blue balloon turning into an ant with a fortress that wants to turn it into a pyramid. But how do you turn a balloon into a pyramid? And then you just have like just and then and then and then and then and then, and you'd run out of an arc even if you don't have a plot. You'd get to the end of and thenning, and the kid would say, "And then what?"
Mm.
And then what? Like that they are really invested in story. So I think for whatever reason, there's probably a lot of research into this that I'm not connected to. For whatever reason, story is the way in which we contextualize information. We put information into a story. If you can use story and even just very, very basic story like a parable,
Mm-hmm.
which is from the Greek parabola, which is just the arc, very simple. This, then that, right? You
Mm-hmm.
can pack a lot of information into that. Belief, however, within the religious context, belief, it really depends, but I would say, broadly speaking, that belief in the monotheistic sense, probably polytheistic, or belief in the theistic sense, is a story that we tell ourselves in order to position ourselves towards the infinite or towards the greatness. And I guess to borrow from Peugeot with regards to worship, and Peugeot is a storyteller. He's thoroughly a storyteller. I don't know to what extent his religion exists outside of story. I think that there's a lot of spirituality outside of story, but he's a very deft storyteller.
Mm-hmm.
And within his frame of reference that you said to me, and I have not watched that video, he says that, you know, worship or attention, the belief or the story would be that which orients your attention to what is outside the story,
Mm-hmm.
or orients your attention into a feedback loop so that you're participating in something greater than you, be it your community, be it your larger self, your deeper self, or be it with God and then everything that God has created.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that would be the role of belief in shaping your attention.
Okay, well, what about those? Sorry, I just need to say this. I once had to tell the story of Job to 4-year-olds. So that was challenging.
Was it though?
I mean,
What
yeah,
choices did you have to make in telling that
I,
story?
I, I, I had, I didn't have I had to go through like the little picture Bible. It wasn't in there. So like that was the story for the week.
Hmm.
And I had to, I was like, oh, well, there's no story to have a picture to reference children, but, okay, let's just, there was a man and God gave him everything and took it away. And then it turned out that, he's not God and that God does not owe him an explanation.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Yeah.
I just did the best I could to
Yeah,
and
yeah. But
then.
why do you think that was left out of that picture Bible, and why do you think it was difficult for your mind to think that a 4-year-old could possibly conceive of losing all their toys and losing all their friends and getting so mad that they can't even get mad at dad anymore? They just get mad at everything, and then everything says, "Do you have any idea what you're talking about?"
Okay, well, now you're making me think that, like, of course I could have, Mr. Storyteller.
No, I didn't mean
No, no,
to
no.
position that. Just why do you think that?
You're
Why do you
giving
think
another
that
way of
we
looking at
think
it.
that children don't understand that ultimately they aren't accountable for
Okay.
everything,
Okay,
or the
so I
center
think
of the
it's
universe?
easier to talk about Noah and the ark because there are the and thens are a
Oh,
little
okay.
bit more
Yeah.
concrete, whereas
Yes.
with
Okay.
Job,
Yeah.
it's so much focused on the cerebral. What did I do? His friends being like, well, it
Yeah.
must have been something. There's maybe that was my constraint. I
Hmm.
know what the chapters are about. Like, I've read through
Hmm.
it, so, and I know it's many a chapter are not on the narrative. They're on
Yeah.
the discussion between
Process. Yeah.
these his friends and him.
It's character.
And then the
Yeah.
end is God coming and showing him, were you there when I laid the foundations of the world?
Yeah.
And I don't know, I got through it. Like, they didn't all stand
Yeah.
up and walk over to play, so maybe they
Oh,
got
okay.
it better than I thought.
There you go. Yeah.
But
I mean, it might. You need to have a conception of responsibility uh, before that, and 4-year-olds are still working through responsibility.
mm,
I mean, that's what they have to learn, and then Job is kind of a later development on that, like hubris, and after you have responsibility, after you're God fearing, right? Say,
mhm.
well, I worship God, and then still not really understanding that God doesn't owe you anything back.
Right, I know. I do think it was a developmental thing, but you're right, it's not that you can't distill the concept down, like the idea of losing all their toys. Like, yeah, they absolutely could get that.
Yeah,
I have a 5-year-old running around the house right now.
yeah,
I can hear him. My husband's picking up my kids with the other ones, and I mean, he's good. He's not going to leave. But I'm like, he would get that. He would get that, losing all of his trains. He loves Thomas trains.
nice.
Anywho, back to, I put a pin in it before, mentally. So you brought up oh, shoot, I just spilled this on myself. No big
Oh,
deal.
I'm sorry.
That's fine. It's okay. It doesn't matter. I'm sorry. Andrea, you're falling apart. Man, it's the Job thing. It really, like, knocked me off balance. So
Oh, wow. Yeah.
I'm blaming. I'm doing what his friends did, just blaming things. I'm not God. There. My hubris has been. Anyway. So okay. You mentioned about belief, and I'm just thinking in the context of those who, I want to say, who don't have belief, but we all believe things. Like, in some many, I'm thinking of, like, the Polar Express. There's this, like, you've got to believe. You've got to believe in Santa. And, like, blessed is he who continues believing in Santa and can hear the special jingle bell after everyone else stops hearing it into adulthood.
Mm.
It,
Hmm.
there it's in us. It's in our secular culture, even though,
Yeah.
So what do those do who don't have that faith? But, again, I know that we don't have belief apart. Sorry, we can have belief apart from religion. But what about stories? The meaning of stories for those who don't have a faith in any religion.
You remember, was it called testimonies?
Oh yeah,
Bearing witness,
yeah,
right? Is
yeah.
that the phrase? Yeah. So when there's a religious congregation, how they reify that they're on the right path together. They have a weekly ceremony. Part of their weekly worship, or maybe monthly worship, is that people give a testimony, say, this is what happened to me, this is how I was brought to Christ. And it's a great tool to make it personal. And when you listen to somebody else's experience of going through something and seeing something or feeling something greater than, and or feeling a love, or seeing the light, like there's these kind of these metaphors that we use, and they're kind of tropes, but you can always see, I don't know if you pay attention, I can see usually if somebody's seen that or not, or if somebody knows that or not. And even if they're young in their faith and still wrestling with belief, that they have a starting point. They have that grain of sand that will be, encrusted into a pearl,
Mm-hmm.
that if the belief is not based on a personal experience, then my question is it not just a rote expression of what was already given to you? Like, how did you make that yours unless you are prompted to reinterpret that through your experience? So belief can show the way, stories can show the way, and give you a sense of that. They always give you a sense of that better than a theological discussion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And of course, people would have to pay attention to that story in the way that it needs to be paid attention to understand the information that's being conveyed, right? People who are very mental, who want to do this God exists, God doesn't exist thing, that stuff can come and go and will go on for eternity.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a big chess game of words.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, what does that actually do in the world? Are you trying to limit people's capacity to be fundamentalist? Are you trying to insert rationality into human behavior, which is a good thing if that's what you are? If you're a virtuous atheist, you're trying to say, okay, listen, you can believe all these things, but reality is reality. We need to deal with reality in very specific ways,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you can argue away or into all these different word games, these belief games. You can do that, or you can go about your life. You can pay attention. If you're an accountant, you go there and you pay attention to the numbers in the way that they need to pay attention to. Then when you go home from work, you're driving in your car, you're on the bus, and you're kind of letting that go, and you get into family mode. You're going to get into your, dad of 4-year-old, mom of 5-year-old mode, and you put away that accounting way of paying attention, and you switch into a more a different phase of attention, a different form of attention. And you give your attention to your family in a different way than you do to your ledger, right? And the ledger wouldn't work if you treated it like a child, and the child wouldn't work if you treated it like a ledger book. And there are parts of life that don't work unless you pay attention to them in a very specific way, a very cultivated way. And that cultivated way has a lot of symbolic knowledge and language around it, and you can get really deep, and it kind of loses its luster for me when it strays too far from the mythological. But there's something about the mythological, there's something about what Peugeot preaches or promulgates. It's starting to ping against you, and there's this woman, and there's this baby, and there's this angel, and there's this donkey, and there's this gremlin, and he's doing all this, and he's showing you a contextual analysis, a way of paying attention to that story that doesn't work if you try to reduce it into a logical proposition. It doesn't work if you try to reduce it into a relational proposition that you would use with your wife. You can't use what Peugeot's teaching to, fix a broken marriage. Now you could probably use it to get yourself put together better, and then you can go from that place into your relationship and analyze if you can even fix it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all these different languages and stuff. And lastly, there's a Vulgate way of communicating spirituality, and by Vulgate I mean a common tongue for communicating spirituality, and it's usually in personal experience. Somebody will just tell you the story where they were at the end of their rope, and they were in a car, and they let go of their will. They were caused to let go of something, and they received something in return. And that thing that they received is a gift without price. It's a light within light. It's a life within your life. It's something that wakes them up on a deep level and causes them to go on a journey to substantiate that in their daily living. So,
okay, so with story, going back to the points that you mentioned about it's what Pajot does, and you could just say, oh well, go watch some of his videos. That's how we can learn how to properly listen to stories. But how are we supposed to pay attention properly to stories? Like, that's what you said, you need to pay attention in the right way. How? Have we lost that?
That so the way that Paul Vanderklay tells, he relates himself, and you can feel over the course of engaging with his material that he has something that he's conveying that's beneath everything that he's saying. He deconstructs Pajot videos, he deconstructs Brett Weinstein and Jordan Peterson, he deconstructs all these things, and he's using all these texts, and maybe he's a C.S. Lewisian or something like that, Lewisian, like he's got his whole system of belief, and he's got his wheelhouse that he's doing. He's playing with these concepts, and he's going over there. But beneath that, there's some sort of reality that he's conveying. That's an embodied reality, a reality that leads to community, a reality that leads to community, and because it leads to community, it leads through his heart to his community.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell that the community that he's founding is not based on the mind. It uses mind to communicate. There's all these voices. He's got a Discord. I haven't been a part of it. I can't handle that app. I mean, I looked on it, but I fled
I know.
for my own reasons. Yeah. But even though there's all these people talking mentally, he's always pointing to something more relational, and he has the tool to do that, because even when he's disagreeing with somebody, he's loving them.
Mm-hmm.
I see a lot of love coming through him.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what love is, but love is his connection. Love is it's like this sap that's flowing through him to other people and is populating a forest. It's bringing people close to him, and then close together through him, through that current that's going. He's using his language up here, but underneath he's connecting people on that level.
I'm glad you brought up community, because I actually did want to ask you about that in relation to narrative, because I know that in ancient narrative, it was a communal.
Ancient narrative.
Yeah, we're going there. I mean, who doesn't want to go to ancient narrative, right? Like,
ancient
it's a party. It's good time.
Yeah, it is. It's ancient. It's been going on. Yeah.
So hearkening back to days of old. No, but for real, it was story originated being told around the campfire, and was like, maybe even sung together. I don't know. I've heard that in the past. There were poems, and there were people knew them, and maybe even sang them together communally. What do you think is the importance or significance of that, and of having a community that goes along with the narrative and who believes in the narrative?
Yeah. Well, it's great for getting things done. Right.
Okay, what things?
Anything. You can build a bridge, you can battle an army, or you can survive some very desperate situations as a community if you have that kind of narrative substrate of mythos. And mythos and story, and I'm not sure about Pajot. I love him dearly, and I trust him a lot. He's got a great, great heart, and he's a brilliant mind and a fabulous imagination. I don't know to what degree things happen beyond that transcendent thing. So he's got this fabulous structure that I jive with, but I don't know what happens when you climb that ladder, when you use his stories to climb up that ladder. Like,
doesn't it just keep going into heaven?
The Truman story. Like, every story is every story is a Truman story. So what happens when you've created this great world in your imagination? It's got all these moving parts. It's all balanced. It's great, but there's still a limit. There's still a dome. What happens when you poke your head out of that dome? Is there anything outside of that dome? Is there anything in that dome that's going to prepare you for what's outside that dome? If you're called to ascend, if you are called out of that dome. What of that dome will remain with you? I don't know. But his dome is very wonderful and beautiful, and it's going to work for a lot of people that jive with that aesthetically. And it might even be really good to have a lot of people, let's say 5% of the population, coincidentally interacting with that narrative might lend a lot of stability to life, because they have that dome is such that it doesn't cause you to be outraged all the time. There's really good aspects of it that doesn't turn you into a flaming asshole. Now, flaming assholes could certainly live within that dome and use that dome to commit flaming asshole. I'm sorry to use bad words on your show.
Oh,
Talking about
Ben, I don't care.
well,
I
anyways,
just
I'm
don't.
sorry.
I just don't
Sorry to
use
the
them.
audience
But you feel free.
to use the mean people. I apologize to you because you're a gentle woman, but I also apologize for staining your show with this rhetoric. But
sometimes you got to go there.
For me, it was wanting to be with the Spirit.
Mm-hmm.
So in my upbringing, there was mentions of the Spirit constantly, and in the Bible. You're talking about the Spirit of God, the Shekinah. That's Jewish. I don't know if it's literally in the Bible
It is
or
the
not, but
Shekinah
the Holy
glory.
Spirit.
It was what was referred to as the when God would descend as
shroud.
A pillar of fire, but then that entered the tabernacle. Fire. Yes.
Okay. But in the New Testament, there's the Holy Spirit and there's the Pentecost, and then during the Pentecost, bunch of people just broke free of spirit, and they were singing and dancing, and it was spontaneous. I was looking for that spontaneous thing. The problem with narratives is that how do you be spontaneous with a predetermined order? If you look at Peugeot, and aesthetically, I'm not picking on him. I really am not picking on him, and I'm sure he has wonderful answers to this. But why does he work within a traditional form? Is there anything new that he's doing? Is there any room for playing around and putting the head of the dragon on St. Michael and St. Michael's head on the dragon, right? Is there any room to play around with those symbols? Or is he committed to that and inscribing those symbols over and over and over again as a meditative process that points outside of that symbol? But with the symbols themselves, is there play? Or do you play with those symbols within that form to achieve something outside of that form, some sort of betterment or communion with God?
Okay, is there?
I don't know. But for me, I wanted something more than that. And so when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, I radically disembarked from my faith. I had in my my first half of my 20th year was spent seeking God very seriously and dealing with a lot of sadness that I had, and dealing with a lot of anger that I had, and dealing with a lot of lust that I had, and dealing with all these things that I had, and seeking purity and seeking to be holy and seeking communion with the Spirit, and reaching a wall, and being fed up with what I'd been fed, being fed up with the man fell into sin, and then Jesus comes and saves you. The end for everyone, or else the end for you. I mean, no, I'm strawmanning that, but I wanted something more, and so I broke out of that, and I played around with different substances that would play around with the chemicals in my brain and allow me to be playful in that area. I played around with relationships in different ways. I played around with a lot of different philosophies where I would just shove my head full of all these different philosophies and then just watch my head like try to make sense of put like the Buddha and Nietzsche together in a conversation with my brain, and then I kind of started to go on a spiritual journey very explicitly in my life, and inscribe into myself and inscribe into the world a holy text of my own and embark upon that journey. And I was offered two paths for me, one of surrender or one of will, one of concentrating my own powers and adulating myself and making myself the center of the world, the path of dark magic, in a way, the path of the of amplification of everything that I was. Then there's this other path that would have me let go of all that and have faith that it would return to me.
Mm.
And for a young man, that's a pretty big wager. For me, it was a pretty big wager. But I gained enough insight into this surrendering model, and I gained enough experience with this willful model that I knew that the willful model would trap me.
Mm.
And I only had so much will to spend in my life. This other model would renew me,
Mm-hmm.
but I would have to give up my ego, and I would have to go through a number of different deaths, and I would have to be constantly reminded of my smallness and my humility and my faults, and seek for atonement and forgiveness of them, where I could just accrue those things and not care about them, but I would always feel them with me in the willful path. I saw that I was too weak for the willful path, ultimately.
That's an interesting way of putting
Here's
it.
the path of surrender.
Can someone who's strong succeed in the willful path?
Well, I don't know what success is. I think that we're getting a little off the rails here, but I think that Aleister Crowley pursued that path. I don't know exactly how he ended up, but I don't imagine him to be a happy person. But I was always amazed at how far he could push that willful path. But I don't know. I saw that I didn't have the strength to redeem myself. I didn't have the strength to accurately disengage from my mistakes without them just becoming a part of me. And I saw that my attention would become narrower and stronger, but more reliant on anger and lust to get its way. And I ultimately saw that caused me to be a person that I didn't want to be in the eyes of other people.
Okay.
And I couldn't get away from being responsible to other people, even though ultimately I kind of just let go of all the people and went and be a hermit for a while to pursue a renewal of myself. But that was based on wanting to be a servant of the Almighty, or wanting to place my life in the service of something greater than my will.
So what is the playing around with different archetypal figures, I guess, that you described? You just like repeating the things I'm saying that in whispers. Like, are we doing an ASMR like little?
We can, if you like.
You're like,
my mouth is a little smacky right now, so I don't.
What was the one that? Oh yeah, the ancient story. Now you're like archetypal figure.
Ancient
story
narrative.
I do think you have a lovely voice, by the way. Like, I do think that when you do that thing, it's like, oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
But you know that. You knew that. You don't need to hear that from. You don't need more ego.
Okay.
You have enough fans.
I returned to playing with the archetypes, though. I returned to Genesis. I returned to trying to recreate.
I know.
A principal text.
Yes, you did. Yes.
So
did I finish my question? I got distracted by your whispers.
I distracted you.
But like, it's my job to be like, no, stay on course. I'm the host. But you know, sometimes we falter.
Yeah, well, look at who you're talking to.
You should know better, Benjamin. You led me astray. And okay, so back on track. Man, I'm spilling tea on myself, and I'm like, oh, your voice.
It's all off screen. Yeah.
I know. But I have to talk about it because it happened. So okay.
Bear witness to the tea.
Yeah. So did you what is the significance, and you already knew the question, but like, what is the significance of changing those things around for you? What do you get out of that? I guess that's my question. Why is it meaningful for you?
Well, my narrative creative project, which I'm trying to finish so I can go on and make a new one, but again, I'm stuck, always stuck with this stuff. You want the beginning and you want the end. And you want the end to be really cataclysmic, right? But you want everything that shatters to have significance. So you have to have the beginning too. You have to establish the conditions of an apocalypse. If you're a world burner worth your salt, you have to build the world first. And I was always attracted to Once Upon a Times and in the beginnings. That's actually part of my That's one of like my sacred mantras.
Mm.
Like I'll find myself saying in the beginning, in the beginning, in the beginning, or before the beginning and after the end, before the beginning and after the end, before the beginning and after the end. That for some reason that unlocks a state in me.
That's going to be the title of
I
this
don't know.
episode. Before the beginning and after the end.
Yeah. So when I wanted to get back to writing after I used writing to try to achieve some sort of spiritual reality or something like that, and then I was kind of smacked around a bit, and then I'm like, okay, well, I can't just go around writing these, gematrias, these grammars, these books of magic. I can't do that. I have to make books that other people want to read.
Mm-hmm.
People don't like poetry. They do like story, though. Okay, so I have to learn how to tell a story. Well, what's a story? And coincidentally, I was talking about this, but I ended up in a preschool. So I'm like, okay, well, what is a story? Once upon a time, blah, 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 blah. Spiky the worm did this.
And then.
I was watching these children. I was watching these children play around. And I was watching these children in this very mythological state of being. These very, very big characters. They're in small bodies, but they're these very epic characters. Every child is such an epic entity. They are what they are. And, they have faults and they have blessings, they have gifts, they have all these things, and they're just so strong, especially, 2 to 5, maybe. There's this really golden age of childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to capture that. And then, well, what did the Bible start with? It started with Adam and Eve and, Cain and Abel, and it started with the same kind of story, these really big characters that represent so much. Adam represents so much. Cain represents so much. Noah represents so much.
Mm-hmm.
Abraham represents so much. And then they get successively more refined. Like King David represents a whole lot, and he produces the Psalms, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't have the mythological status of Adam, of Eve, of Cain, of Abel, of Noah. Like he's more closer to a modern human being conception of a human being.
Right.
When you in the Chronicles and the Book of Kings and stuff, you have these characters who are very dramatic, but just like the difference between the Iliad, the Odyssey, and the ancient Greek myths.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the ancient Greek myths with all these titans and these gods and stuff, and then you get to the Odyssey, and there's these human beings fighting this war, and they're still larger than life,
right,
but they're not so large that they're the pillars of the universe. They aren't these principal. They're not these principal characters that create the godlike superstructure of a polyphonic universe where everything represents everything. Achilles represents a whole lot, but he's still Achilles. He's still a mortal man. There's something about him that will die, that has an end and has a beginning.
Why is
it doesn't just represent this thing eternal.
Why is it like that? Why does it go from so big to, is it a maturity? Is it?
I think it's developmental. I don't. I can guess. I think it's developmental. I think that when you speak in terms of gods, it satisfies something, but it's not really satisfying for adults. Like we would rather have stories when we watch our dramas. There's not a lot of mythological dramas. There's dramas that edge into the mythos, and I'm talking TV shows or something like that. You can see some glimmers of magic, some glimmers of mythology and stuff, but they're much more closer, like Thor in the Marvel universe.
Well, you're right. He's more human than God. Like, I know he's a god, but
he is a god, but he goes through this. And it's actually really brilliant what they did with him in, I guess, Endgame, when he was just this schlubby guy. He'd fallen from grace.
And he's really still a god.
He's in this other state of being. He's in this fallen state of being, and he has to kind of redeem himself. So there was these really great arcs of redemption that these human characters travel through. And which makes them less than gods at that point, but closer to us, more relatable to us. We can't really relate to an angel,
right? Okay.
We can't relate to an angel. Have you ever seen an angel? It would obliterate you. Like, you have no conception. You have no, like, even in the Bible, when the Bible talks of the Son of God or something coming through and one of the prophets sees the god, and the prophet just falls down flat on their face, and they're standing before this divine radiant image.
So I'm a man
There's
of
certain things
unclean
that
lips. Is it that
I don't
part?
remember what it was.
That's Isaiah.
There's these glimpses of prophets interacting with the transcendent, where it really shows you starkly that there's a limit to the human. There's a limit to the human that you can't conceive of. The imaginary, the godlike, is something that we can imagine, and it's brute force. It's really greater, but we can't really embody those, and we don't really relate to those. We relate more to things that are more like us, more human than
the
us.
heroes.
So we project these anthropomorphic human-like behaviors onto the elements, onto the universe, onto the sun, but we still know that those things are much greater than those human elements and stuff. So we can tell stories about them, but there's this huge distance between them and us. And the hero takes is closer to us, but it still is partaking in that world. And then there's different gradations of narrative and of literature that get closer and closer to what we are.
Wait. So why do you see you are being quite fair with regards to Peugeot and saying like he's working within the frame. Yeah. What if I want to work outside of the frame with those aspects that are found within the frame? So you started answering, and then we did a bit of a tangent. So why the kids? That's where you said I started seeing these kids.
Yeah.
Respond. So why do you want to play with those the archetype? The archetypes.
Well, I wanted to tell a story, and so there was this book called The Bidden Fruit, which is a play on the forbidden fruit, and it inverts the Bible. It inverts that primary assumption that this is a fallen world, that we were kicked out of heaven, and now we have to work, and now we have to labor. And be scared of snakes and till the fields and be subservient to men because we have to bear children and stuff like that. In the basic conception, or the hypothesis, or the basic seed of this book, The Bidden Fruit, is that human beings were invited to go from a higher state into a lower state and lift up that lower state. We were invited into this bidden world. We were bid here to lift it up and to participate in the act of lifting what is low to what is high, and being the bridge of transit between the transcendent and the material. And from that follows all these other conditions for the story to take place. All these different characters arise. You have Adam and Eve. They have 4 daughters in the garden, and one daughter leaves before it's time, so she ends up in a lower form. She ends up in this really twisted biological form because her consciousness, she's just pure consciousness. She enters into the world before there's a body suitable to human consciousness, before the human being had been crafted through evolutionary processes and to be able to contain the human noble soul. And then another daughter is scared to leave. She looks at what happens down there. She's like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. Don't make me go, God. Don't make me go, God. Don't make me go, God. And Adam says, well, if you pray, maybe you'll get what you want. And she prays, and then she's given a gift of bringing into life all of these female souls in heaven, where you have the hour, all these female souls that just exist in Eden. And then there's these 2 other daughters that decide to go into the world with Adam and Eve. And how Adam and Eve and those 2 daughters actually enter the world, there's this spot in the material world where there's this pillar of smoke. It's an umbilical cord of mist that descends up and down from our plane, and then Eden, our true home. And they are all taken down, and what happens, the moment of breaching, is when Eve gives birth to the first 2 male heirs of Adam, Anwas and Anwar. And from those 2 twins and those 2 daughters arises all of humanity. Well, Adam and Eve go through the whole world, and they have all these children all over the place because their job is to populate the world. But the Anwar and Anwas go back to, there's these 2 basic paths of masculine spirituality. And then there's these other female spiritualities that I explore through Vina and Sola. Vina being one version of the female archetype, and one version, and then Sola, who's I know better because she was more interesting to me. She's the healer type of female, and her spirituality is to convince things to heal themselves. That's how she's a healer. She convinces. She says that health is the ability to become healthy. It's not being in a state of health and falling. It's the ability. True health is the ability to maintain that state of health and to fix yourself and to overcome the obstacles or the pains or the faults in the world through grace. And she's the bearer of grace. I have an end to this rant.
Yeah. Okay, I believe
you. It's not interminable.
Okay.
So then you have the two masculine forms of spirituality. Yeah. One is Anwar, who is a very humble, follows in the footsteps of Adam. He's given this life to make the most of it. He's the shepherd. He's a kind of just somebody who lives life and provides for his family. And he's kind of boring. I don't want to write about him. I want to write about Anwas, right? And Anwas looks at the world. And here's the point of the story. So Anwas looks at the world and he decides that he has this capacity. He's the highest form of human being. I mean, Adam is technically higher than him and his brother's at the same place, but he is at the source of humankind. He has the most excellent mind and heart and will that will ever be given. Everything after this first generation is going to be divided and subdivided and start mixing with the dirt and getting further and further from that originary state. And he's at the top of this mountain and he says, I can wed my will to the will divine, or but my will is so fine that it could be a will unto itself. I would to will a world unto my own. And so he decides to go on this path of self-mastery, of concentration of his will, and of eventually letting go of everything that's given. Letting go of heaven, letting go of grace, letting go of leaving this world and ascending back up to his originary state and becoming unto himself his own world. And that's what he does. He goes through the steps, and I don't want to ruin the story, but he goes through this multiple steps of separating himself from the world and creating a world unto himself. He is the primary builder. He's this very, very concentrated form of masculine creativity. Now,
is he okay? This is how my kids ask: is he a bad guy or a good guy?
That's a great question. That's exactly where I was going with this. So my first draft of this story, it was in 2001 or 2002. I got this blank book and I drew all these illustrations for it. And I had this sub-story of this father and the son, this prodigal son narrative, because I was dealing with some issues with my dad or inside myself with the father figure. And so there's this conversation between a father and a son. And then from those conversations came all these stories about the first people, like this rebooting of Genesis, this biblical fan fiction. And in my first draft, Anwas was the bad guy. In my second draft, Anwas was the bad guy. And it didn't feel right. There was something cheap. I was cheapening this man by conceiving. There was something wrong about the way that I was conceiving this guy. Like, this is the wrong path, or I was moralizing him, or there was something broken about him. There's nothing broken about this man. He knew exactly what he wanted to do. And I went through a couple more deaths in my life. I was broken across the shoals of romantic and ambitious life, and I beached again. I lost all of my ambition, all my will to build. I lost my will all over again. And I beached against the preschool once more. I just floated ashore of this little preschool with these children and snack time and nap time and playtime and all these women that would take care of everybody, and women are wonderful. I was there. I couldn't write anymore. And then there was this thing called the iPhone that was invented. I have one in my hand. I have the 10th or 12th generation, but I got the 4th generation iPhone. I got this iPhone, so it was 2010 or something like that. And I was working full time. And I had this itch. Like, I was writing these songs, but I had this itch. Like, I want to tell this story. I want to tell the story. I was watching these children play. I'm like, I think I figured out how to speak biblically, like really speak in that mythological tone, really sparse, really pared down, really just the concentrated story. And I got this text application, which is black with white letters, and I would walk around the preschool and I would just type in one sentence after the other, one sentence after the other. And I knew I wouldn't be able to write Anwas. I knew I didn't have the capacity to write this character. So I wrote everybody but him. I wrote around him so that he's there, but I'm writing around him and around him and around him, and I'm telling all these stories with this person that I really want to talk. There's the story that I really want to tell. I'm preparing to tell that story, and I wrote around and around and around and around and around it, so that by the time it was time for me to write him, which was 10 years after that, when I was at the Evergreen State College, and I got to the end of my final book. You know, I was at chapter 24 of this baby here. I'm like, it's time to tell his story. It's time to tell the story of the woman and the man. These two principal characters that I've written all around, I'm going to tell now. And I chose an epic form. I chose a non-rhyming iambic pentameter. There's a technical term where it doesn't rhyme, but like this ancient form, you know, well, not ancient, but Milton's form.
Yeah.
Ancient forms of storytelling. And I told it one step after a time. And then, like, so I have that diadem from which everything else descends. So we can finally get to the end of time, where his behavior at the beginning of time, Anwas's behavior, affects everybody all the way to the end of time. So I had it all ready to put that in place. And that's the only book that you can find of me that's printed. And it's really, really dense. I'm not going to say that.
I'm only a quarter of the way through. I bought it. What did
it was like a year
did you change the name of isn't it Tale of Anwas, or what is it called?
Anwas, son of Adam.
Anwas, son of, yeah. Is it called Bidden? Did you change it?
No, Bidden Fruit is the stories of everybody else.
Okay, but Anwas, son of Adam is the one that you have published.
Yeah, it's just this very small little book. It's very dense. Everything is metered out, and it refuses the attention of anybody except for somebody who's totally dedicated to paying attention. And that's the thing about Anwas. Anwas doesn't want to be seen. He doesn't. You're not worthy of. Nobody's worthy of him, right?
So that begs the question: is he a good guy or a bad guy?
What is the good?
Oh, let's just we're just gonna like end off this last hour or so with a really like easy little letdown. What is the good, let's land this Andrea, plane. With the bangs?
What is the good?
What is the good? Well, if we look at Tolkien and the way he begins the Silmarillion, the Ilúvatar has his song. Everyone sings in harmony. Melkor comes along and sings his own song, causing disharmony. Then that gets reharmonized and moved back in. That angers him, and then he leaves. So, I mean, give or take a few, brilliant words.
Yeah.
But that is what I have been steeped in literature-wise. When you try to go your own way, which you described in your own, we're gonna call it testimony, your own journey, maybe, about which direction. This way lies despair. And
I think it has collateral effects. It affects his bride, it affects his sons, and his sons, one's a good guy, one's a lost man, and one guy is definitely evil. When you get to that, then this guy's evil for sure, because he has no father. He's missing something that Anwas had. Anwas just left and took that thing with him, that guiding principle. And so you have Awaz, I'm talking about mythology. This is so coded language, but yeah, there is a place for the evil character there, but it's not at the start. Anwas does his own thing, and
Yes,
then
but
and
doing
then
your own thing is archetypally apart from that's straying. That's what you're literally saying with regards to Peugeot. If we're because he's working in the frame, and so what
mm,
you're doing is, well, maybe going your own way isn't inherently Paradise Lost evil
mhm.
style, right?
Well, yeah. And it's also a tale of Western theocracy or Western philosophy. The individual, the monad, which has benefits and
Right.
detriments. It's
You're
not
right. That
inherently evil.
is.
I don't think of it. I don't think of that character as he exists beyond good and evil. He exists in the world of the world builders. So he includes evil and good inside of himself. He encapsulates them inside of his own world. Now, whether or not his world is witnessed and can it be real without it being witnessed, that's the other question. If you go your own way, do you exist without a witness?
Mm.
And can you survive without that witness? Is your will so great that it can reify itself? Or does it not long for somebody inside of itself to rebel from it and restart that again? Does it not seek out other people to merge with it and be and reflect it back upon itself?
Again, just really light questions to end this off,
But
Benjamin.
but the, there but that's different than going out and destroying people or perverting other people and perverting the land, which is what I would think of as evil.
Mm-hmm.
Evil is some sort of twisted form of vengeance upon the good.
Mm-hmm.
Evil is immense amount of power that's acting amorally, that doesn't care that it lays waste and starts fiddling around with certain balances and stuff. And my conception of that primary masculine Western creative impulse is that it can persist above, and that we need that, and that we lose something when we think of that as evil.
Mm.
We lose something when we think of that as morally bad. It's a part of us. It's a part of us. To what degree we can actually follow that out in our own lives really relies on our own strength. And I think it's wise for most of us not to go too far down that path,
Mm.
because ultimately you do rely on other people. You
Mm.
do rely on some sort of humble relationship with your beginning, your origin, and your end. I think that for most of us, that's the path. I think every once in a while there's somebody who can exist outside of that doesn't become corrupted by that path. And I know I'm not speaking directly to our current moment. I'm speaking kind of mythologically there.
Mm, kind of. Yeah. Well, what is it about the end that draws you in more than the beginning? You almost said that you wanted to do the end, but you mean you got to have the beginning before you have the end. So what is it about the apocalyptic, like,
Mm.
end that is a draw for you to end this?
Well,
We'll say to end
yeah,
this
to end
discussion.
before the beginning and after the end, and at the beginning, because there is an end, there can be beginning. I had a couple dreams of the apocalypse a
Uh-huh.
long time ago, and there was two dreams, but I think all I can remember was one. I had a series of dreams about the end of the world, but the one that I remember was that the world was ending. The time was ending, and the saints in heaven were coming down to wake people up, so that they can find their way out of chaos and return to their true state as human beings. And I was part of this kind of emergency crew that was kind of ferreting the message of the saints to other people and saying, look up into the sky, look up into the sky, and remember who you are. And there was a city, and the saints were actually, I remember this image of all these people carved out of ivory shining, and they were all descending down and kind of, gifting us something.
Hmm.
And I was going around, and it was like really chaotic because the world's ending. Like, it was like everything was like falling apart, and I got to this place, and I'm in some inner city. And then somebody says, there's this little girl, I think, said, okay, you can't leave until you learn this. You're not allowed to leave until you learn this. And she opened a door and there was this room and it was all rap. It was just rap music. I'm like, are you serious? Like, I have to learn rap music before I can graduate.
And it's a little
Like,
girl who's telling you this?
I think it was the little girl who told me that. I'm not sure though. It was a while ago. But I remember like there was this inner voice that said, you can't leave. You cannot leave this fallen world. Your journey is not over until you learn to rap. And I was really upset because I wasn't into rap music, you know, and I didn't know what I was telling myself or what was being told to me, but it was ultimately about communication. I had to learn language. I really had to study the ways in which language is put together and broken apart and played around with before I could go on to the next state with my own life.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the parameters of why I was in this world. Like, that is what I was there to learn. And the funny part, the comedic part, was just how disappointed I was that it wasn't this grand mission, right? It was just like, I just had to study how to learn this incredibly linguistic musical form.
Mm-hmm.
That was my condition. So
And
that didn't answer your question, but I had a sense of the ending. And you want an ending that's just like, oh my God, you know, and like the mountains are shifting and the world, the moon is breaking apart and falling down. Like that feeling is so magnificent, so terrible. And I want that feeling in there. And I want that orgasmic, that orgasm of the beginning. In the beginning is such a wonderful release of energy. And then you have to work out all that murky, complex stuff between the end and the beginning in order for it to draw up into that feeling. You know? So the middle is where I have the most problems and where I fail the most.
Oh, well, that's sort of the dream, is like you have to do this language mastery before you can get to the cool ivory folk coming down and whatever it is they're gonna do. Okay.
You have to do the mundane work.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of very relatable. Not sort of, that's extremely relatable to all of us. So maybe that's what you're there for. Okay.
That's why you had me here.
Yeah.
For that. Thank you for allowing me to babble about my issues with infinity and beyond.
Well, Buzz Lightyear. I have been battling with my own understanding of infinity and beyond. So I very much appreciate you explaining your perspective, and I'm looking forward to you exploring this slowly on your channel. I'll be expecting it. I'll be okay.
It's part of the Apocrypha. So thank you for having me on so I can dish on the hidden life of Benjamin Boyce, YouTube sensation.
Okay. We're ending it here. That's it.
Okay.
That's the end.
Thank you.
Yeah. If you would subscribe, that would be the bee's knees.